This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
A mother, a mission, and medical marijuana. Holley Moseley on this edition of Conversations. Holley Moseley was on the front lines of the battle to get medical marijuana legalized in the state of Florida. For her, it was personal and a time-sensitive issue. You see, Holley was not a lobbyist or political operative, but a mother trying to save her daughter. In her book, A Ray of Hope, a mother's story of love, healing, and the miracle of medical marijuana, Moseley tells her family's story and the role medical marijuana played in improving the health of her daughter. We welcome Holley Moseley to Conversations. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Tell me how Rayanne came into your life.
So about 16 years ago, I was a nurse working at Sacred Heart Children's Hospital, and that's where Rayanne and I met. She was my patient. I had her for 3 days in a row, so those are 12-hour shifts. And after the third day, I went home and I really worried about her. Rayanne was diagnosed with epilepsy and cerebral palsy, and she was hospitalized as a medical shelter patient. So that means that there was not a medical foster home in the community that could take her, and so they brought her to the hospital. And it just so happened at the time there were 3 other children that were all medical foster patients. And so Rayanne just happened to be my patient. And again, by the third day, I worried about her, and I decided on that 4th day I was just going to go visit her. It wasn't my shift to work, but I just wanted to go visit her. And while I was there, I ran into the social worker and I said, hey, what could I do to help this little girl have a home for Christmas? Because it's Thanksgiving, we're inching closer. And she said, well, let me see what we could do. And she came back to me and she's like, have you heard of non-relative placement? And I said, no. And she said, well, let's see if I can get mom and dad's okay to let her go home with you. And so I said, well, time out. I need to get my husband on board with this. So I had that conversation with my husband, and he agreed. He says in hindsight, or when we talked later, he said he never really thought that it would work out, but he didn't know that there was a divine power involved, and we made it happen. And so I took a couple days off work and got all the paperwork and background checks and home studies done that we needed to get done. And within 2 days, she was coming home, and that was going to be 2 days before Christmas. And so we had the most unbelievable Christmas. And what also was so special about it is our family were so involved and so willing to help and weren't scared of, you're bringing home a medically needy child. Everyone just pitched in and, did everything that we needed to do to prepare to bring her home, from diapers to protecting the home to just so many different things. And it was just really nice to receive that support. We had, again, the most incredible Christmas, and our family started reaching out and say, what can we do to make sure that this is Rayanne's forever home? And Peyton and I were feeling it also, my husband and I. Right. And so we hired an attorney, and it took some time, to go through the legal hoops of adoption. During those times, we were just trying to figure out Rayanne. So she's new to us. We don't know, her physical abilities, and how her seizures present, nor how much the neglect affected her. And so we were trying to just learn her. And the cerebral palsy didn't slow her down. She had the will, and we went to therapy appointments, and she was determined to do things. It was the seizures that we just couldn't get a handle on. Little things were happening that weren't just obvious. Mm-hmm. Like, you think of a seizure, you think of the Hollywood, you fall on the floor and you convulse type seizure. Right. And even in nursing school, we didn't learn about all these other types of seizures. So Rayanne was doing these things that I noticed were different, but I couldn't quite pick up on exactly what it was. And it wasn't until that activity became more severe, and it was obvious, that the eye twitching and the drooling and becoming pale, and we're then progressing to convulsing and, passing out and so forth. So then we became on this just roller coaster of the world of epilepsy. Trying to find, anything to help ease it. And so what was happening is she would have a seizure, and the neurologist would tell us to up her medication. And then she would have another seizure, and they'll say, well, maybe we need to add another medication. And she would have a seizure, maybe we need to add another medication. And it was to the point where she was so heavily medicated that we lost Rayanne. Like that funky spirit of I can do all things, right. We were losing that. But she was still seizing. And so it was very confusing, and it just took us some education on learning epilepsy, learning about meds and side effects to truly make sense of it all. Rayanne went into what's called status epilepticus, which means it's in a medical emergency. Her brain is constantly seizing. And is considered, very serious. So she's brought to the PICU, she's put on in a medically induced coma, and put on a ventilator. That was the scariest moment of our life. Working in the hospital, I've seen children in that situation. Right. But loving a child and seeing them in that situation made me weak in the knees, and I couldn't think straight. And so she made it out of that experience, and I said, we have to keep looking elsewhere. And so that's when we asked for our second opinion, and we went to Miami Children's Hospital in Miami, and she was evaluated for seizure surgery. And so the thought is, with seizure surgery, it can be very successful. Like if you can pinpoint the area of the brain that's misfiring and surgically remove that area, the patient could lead a seizure-free life. But unfortunately for Rayanne, she has multifocal points in her brain, so multiple areas of her brain are misfiring, and so she wasn't a good surgery candidate. However, they sent us home with 3 options. We could try a new anti-epileptic med that was new to the market, but yet not yet FDA approved for children. We could consider a seizure surgery that would disconnect the right and left hemispheres of her brain. However, there could be some very serious side effects with that. She could go blind, she could never speak, she could never walk again. There's some very serious things that terrified us. Or we could consider a VNS, which is called the Vagal nerve stimulator. And it's just an implantable device that's put under the chest wall, and it's connected to the vagus nerve. And so my husband and I reviewed those options. Again, we weren't crazy about any of them, but we decided to do the VNS. And so Rayanne had the surgery and had the device implanted. Unfortunately, we didn't see the success that we were hoping for. She was still seizing, and she went into status epilepticus again. So we're back in the hospital, back in the PICU, on a ventilator. And this time, the neurologist said to us to say our goodbyes, to prepare for the worst, and that she may not come out of this.
And how many years ago was that?
And so that happened when she was about 10.
About 10, so about 6 years ago.
Yeah. And so no parent ever wants to hear that. And if I felt like it was true, I maybe could have accepted it, but I just felt like there was more. Right. And I can't explain it. We weren't giving up. We were going to keep going. And so Rayanne made it out of the hospital, and we decided we need a third opinion. And that's something I want all parents to realize. It's okay to keep searching and getting other people's opinions, to follow that gut instinct. And so that's what we did. We went to Shands, the University of Florida, and I said, I want the head of the department. And so we saw Dr. Paul Carney, and everything, he changed all our ways of thinking up until this point. He said, I'm going to hospitalize her for a week. We're going to hook her up to an EEG, and we're going to monitor her seizures. However, we're going to take away medications, and we're going to see what that does. So I'm thinking, we're gonna, who knows what's gonna happen? We've been told for so long, more meds, more meds, more meds to control the seizures. Here we are taking away meds. But her seizures improved. So on the EEG, clear as day, her seizures are improving after taking away one of the medications. So he said that medicine was a bad medication for her. So then 2 days later, we take away a second medication. Her seizures improve even more. He said that medicine was a bad medication for her. So that just started our wheels of thinking, whoa, wait a second, there's more to it. And so that really pushed us into the alternative type therapies as well. But he sent us home on 2 meds, so we got there with 4 drugs. She was in a wheelchair, in a diaper. She had lost so many skills that we had worked so hard for. She was going to school and pretty much just taking a nap all day. Her quality of life was very minimal. And left, she was starting to feel a little bit better. She wasn't on all these heavy meds. And so time goes by, we're somewhat stable, she's seizing, but it's nothing like what we're working really hard in therapies, we're making some improvements. And then Rayanne hits puberty. And so something very common for girls and boys, but particularly young girls, and in puberty, their seizure activity will increase, just hormones,
Sure.
So also around that time, a CNN documentary comes on TV. And so my husband calls me in like, you have got to see this. There's a little girl on TV who has severe epilepsy. Her parents are, have her on a DNR and don't know what else to do. And so they turn to cannabis. And so because she's in Colorado Springs, she's able to try cannabis. And so her mom gets 2 doctors to sign off on it. She gets the meds and she gives it to her and she starts to see improvements. And so my husband and I are like, could it be that easy? Could it be that simple? Like, are we missing something? We have to go and see it for ourselves. Right. And so my husband got on the phone and he was able to get in touch with the Stanley brothers. He was on the phone with one of the brothers and said, hey, I have a daughter with epilepsy, very interested in this plant that you're breeding, which is known as Charlotte's Web. It's named after the little girl in the documentary. And, can we come and see what this is all about? And so Rayanne wasn't stable enough to fly with us, but he and I flew out there. And the coolest part, we got to visit the lab where the plant's processed. We got to visit the grow house where the plant's grown. But the coolest part was visiting the patients who had all moved from all over the world to have access to this plant and hearing their story. It's our story. However, they now have access to a high CBD oil and their kids are improving. Okay. And so...
explain the oil.
Yeah, so the oil is, getting to see it made into oil was a very neat process. So the plant's hung upside down. It's then processed in the lab. They pull like a thick sap is the best way for me to explain it, and mix it with an olive oil or an MCT oil, and then the patient takes it orally. Okay. And so this oil that we're interested in, the high CBD, is an oil that's low in THC, and so it's not getting anyone high. Right.
And it's taken orally, so it's not, so we don't want to have people to have the impression that you're sitting around smoking marijuana.
Correct. And people ask us that still. How do you get Rayanne to smoke it, And my husband will mess with them and say, well, we have a bong, and so forth, which is, No, she takes it orally like she did any of her other medications. Right. Just a dropper in her mouth twice a day.
Wow. And how soon did you start seeing a difference?
Well, so for Rayanne, we didn't get to start it yet. So so state of Florida is not yet legal. So we at that time went to Colorado, saw all, came back so excited, and at the same time, Representative Matt Gaetz was a Florida state representative. Okay. He saw the documentary and he reached out to Colorado and said, hey, I'm interested in possibly doing a bill, something similar in Florida. And we were connected. Okay. And so he asked us to come speak at a workshop in Tallahassee. And that changed everything. Because at the time, we were still floating around the idea of, do we need to move? Do we move our whole family? Like, move part of our family? Like, how are we going to make this work? Right. And after going and speaking in Tallahassee and having all of the other parents there all asking for the same thing, it really felt like this was the right thing, was to advocate for it in Florida. Right. And so that's what we did. We hired a lobbyist, we hired media consultant, and we spent a lot of time in Tallahassee and tried to meet with as many senators and representatives that we could and just share our story. And eventually the law got passed. Right. Eventually, Governor Rick Scott signed the Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act into law in 2014. And we were all excited, and here we go. However, it took about a year, maybe more, before patients could actually get the product. So the law required that the Department of Health write rules and regulations. So how does the patient get the medicine, and how is it grown and so forth. And so those had to be written. It was in that period of time that we kind of became anxious and ready to get started. And so we had a physician that said, I think you should. Uh-huh. And so we worked with the physician and we started Rayanne. And it was the coolest moment. We videoed her like it was her first steps. It was just such a momentous event for us, life-changing, And she just started on 0.2 ml, so that's a tiny drop, literally. And within a week, we started to see small things. So her seizures didn't improve instantly. Right. It took some time. Right. And so we started to see better gait. She seemed happier. She wasn't drooling as much, better eye contact. But each time we would increase the dose, those things improved even more, where other people were starting to notice things with her as well. It took, some time before we really started to see a decrease in the seizure activity. But we just stayed diligent and didn't give up. And then working with her neurologist, he said, okay, I think it's time to start decreasing some of her seizure medications. And when a patient's been on a seizure med such as clonazepam, which is Klonopin, for 7 years, mm-hmm. coming off a heavy benzo like that is tough. And so she had some trouble coming off that medication. But we just kept the path and, kept going and got her off of that. And now she is weaning off her last anti-seizure drug. So in 2 weeks, she'll be completely pharmaceutical free. Wow. The cooler part is that Rayanne is over 2 years seizure free. Over 2 years and no seizures? No seizures. Any idea what is in that oil that causes this healing effect? Yeah, so the U.S. government has a patent on CBD or cannabidiol as an neuroprotectant and an anti-inflammatory. So many believe that it helps to decrease the neuroinflammation, which is probably one of the reasons that it's so successful in epilepsy. It also helps with neuron excitability. So there's many properties. There's a lot of studies being done to try to pinpoint exactly what it is. And it's probably different for each patient as well, but it's working for her, and we're ecstatic. Any indication that this may also help patients with other types of diseases? Oh yes, definitely. So many of the neurological diseases. There's studies being done on MS, Alzheimer's. There's even recent studies, obviously not done in the United States, but particularly in Israel, being done on autism and CBD. So there's lots of hope for CBD itself to help many different medical diagnoses. And then many see THC can be very helpful as well with cancer and many other diseases as well. So, we're just on the forefront of this and we need more research. Is the funding there for the research? Well, I don't think that's even the issue. The issue is cannabis is Scheduled I substance in the United States. Mm-hmm. So you can't, the bill that passed in Florida allowed for $1 million to go to Florida University to do research. Right. and none of them wanted to touch it because they were afraid of losing their federal funding. Right. And so that's a big issue.
That's a big deal because so maybe you can explain this a little bit so people understand, but the bottom line is this is legal in the state of Florida, maybe legal in some other states around as well, but it's still against the law as far as the federal government is concerned.
Correct. Yes. So, and just another little piece to add in there. So, medical marijuana or all marijuana is considered illegal, but the Farm Bill did pass. The federal Farm Bill allowed for hemp products. So that is any product that is under 0.3% THC. Right. To be considered legal. However, it requires your state to still set up a program. So the state of Florida still has to write the rules and regulations for that. So it's just very confusing for patients, particularly. But yes, as far as research goes, no one wants to touch it because of its status on the Controlled Substance Act. Any
idea when the feds may open the gates and allow this to become legal federally?
You know, there's some hope. President Trump has made comments that he will support a medical cannabis bill. Mm-hmm. I've seen some research bills. There's some VA research bills that are receiving a lot of success from congressmen. So I do think that something will happen, and I hope that it happens quickly because I think that this is the time. Many people suspect 2019 is going to be the year, so we're hoping.
And I think it's important that we clarify that we are talking about this for the use of medical reasons. We're not talking about recreational. Correct.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way I want to encourage any of my children to take, cannabis. Rayanne's using this for medical purposes. Right. There's no way I would want to encourage any of my children to take Klonopin either.
Right.
However, she had to take it for medical purposes. It's kind of the same. I look at it kind of the same way.
Right. What advice do you have for parents who might be dealing with the same thing that you and your husband were dealing with as far as the challenges that with Rayanne and her medical conditions?
Yeah. So I think first is, as a parent, to educate yourself. Learn as much as you can about your kid's diagnosis. And connect with a good support group, whether it be, I tried to build a solid support group around us and started with our physicians. A great pediatrician's important, someone that you can trust and that you have their cell phone number, and then build neurologists and other specialties that you need that you feel like work together as a team. And as the parent, you have to remember you're the team leader. And it's your goal to make sure that it's working in the child's best interest.
When we spoke as we were scheduling this interview, you told me that she had just celebrated her 16th birthday.
Correct.
So talk about her quality of life right now.
Oh, she's doing so well. We're so proud of her. I actually just had her IEP today, and her teachers were going over her testing, and she's improved so significantly in the past year, like on all of her testing scores. They were just bragging about how incredible of a jump that's been, that kids don't usually make that big of a jump. And socially, she's just so much happier. She's able to do things now with a little bit more freedom that we're not always looking over her, she feels better, and I think that's one of the biggest things. She feels like doing things, and so her quality of life completely changed. She's happy and loving life, and I think that's all any parent can want for their kid.
Right. I think one of the things you also wanted to talk about is the importance of adoption, and especially for children who have medical challenges. And I've got, unfortunately, only about 3 minutes left, so
okay,
give me your thoughts on that.
So there's such a need. I mean, obviously working in the hospital and having 3 patients at one time all needing medical foster homes, there's a huge need there for not only adoption, but for families to step forward to be foster parents, but then also for the medical side of it. Adoption has been the most incredible thing that we've ever done, and we never thought that this was never my plan. Somehow, there was a divine power involved that took us on this path. And Rayanne came into my life for a reason. I 100% believe it. And she has changed not only my life, but I believe lives of her friends in our community, and then laws in Florida.
Yeah.
I don't think she's even done yet. I think she has more to go.
Yeah. She's written a chapter in the book as well.
She has.
Yeah. What'd she have to say?
Yes, she gives her own little personality, gives her likes and her dislikes and her plans for the future. One of her biggest goals is to go to Paris when she turns 21. Not sure where she got it from. She's going to college. She's getting a roommate. I mean, she has plans for herself, you know, and that's very encouraging as a parent. That's what we want our kids, you know, to.
What kind of response have you received from other parents and people in the community?
Yeah, really positive. You know, I think everyone has, especially in Gulf Breeze, they've seen the struggles that we've gone through with her. And they've all fallen in love with her as well. And they want what's best. And I think once you do your research and you learn about cannabis, you learn about the endocannabinoid system, then you see that what we're doing is in her best interest. And you know, I had a lady one time stop me in the grocery store and say, I just can't support this. You know, I have a brother who is an addict and, you know, and stuff like that. And I respect everyone's opinion, sure. But, you know, we've been very, very blessed and lucky to get the support that we've received.
I guess I asked myself the question, you know, there are plenty of prescription drugs out there that people become addicted to, but at the same time, after surgery, they're prescribed to you, or they might be prescribed to you for some other illness. I don't know. Just something to think about, perhaps, huh?
Yeah, so there's even a lot
difference?
of research being done on the use of medical cannabis for opioid addiction.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we're on the brinks of something, you know, big, as long as we can get the federal government to reschedule it.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you and your husband and Rayanne have already done something big.
Oh,
What a
thank
wonderful
you.
story. And I mean, how awesome is it for you and your husband to do what you guys have done? And that's just, it's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Congratulations,
Thank you
Holley.
so
Thank you
much.
so much for coming on the program. The name of the book is A Ray of Hope. It's a mother's story of love, healing, and the miracle of medical marijuana. And Holley Moseley is the author, and of course a foreword by Paul Carney, who is a professor of neurology and pediatrics at the Department of Neurology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And Holley mentioned him a couple of moments ago and how instrumental he was in helping get the process moving along. And also, you're available for like speaking engagements as well.
Correct, yes.
And we've been putting your website up there,
Yeah.
so folks can contact you through that. Holley Moseley, by the way, as I mentioned, her website is arrayofhopebook.com. You can see more of our conversations online at WSRE.org/conversations, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take great care of yourself. We'll see you around.